Good evening.
Good evening.
When I was a little kid, we had, growing up, my brother and I, we had this old Mickey Mouse camera, and it was flat, and you put the film in. Yeah, it was one of those where you had to put the film in. And so you put the film in, and then you take a picture. Now, this camera was it was a rectangle, and it looked the same on all sides, and so you had to be very careful on what end you were looking through, because if you looked through the wrong end, you'd end up with a picture of your eyeball. And so we have pictures that my brother and I'm talking like 3 and 4 years old. We take these pictures and it's just like a 4-year-old's eyeball and that's it. Or sometimes, we're little and so we're taking a picture of like our parents and it's just like their knees down or something. And so when you take a picture, you have to make sure you're focused or you're pointing it first at the right object. That's kind of like critical for photography. But then after making sure you're pointed at the right object, you then, on some cameras, have to make sure that the picture is in focus. And that's really what separates a good picture from a bad picture, is whether or not it's in focus. And then sometimes what separates a good picture from a really good picture is using focus with a purpose or intentionally. And so this idea, you look at this picture and it's completely out of focus. You can see, okay, there might be some water there, sky and lights, but you don't really know what the picture is. And so that's, an example of poor focus or not using focus effectively. Here, it's a grasshopper, and if you look at the picture, the focus is actually on the grass instead of on the grasshopper. And so it's out of focus still. And so at least it's a little bit better than the previous picture, but the focus, it's on the wrong subject, per se. But then when you use focus correctly, you get a picture like this. You get a picture and it makes the picture so much better. It's much more effective. And that's really the purpose of focus, is to make a picture more effective. It draws your attention to the correct subject. The item that's usually in focus is where the photographer wants your attention. And it's true for photography or even video or film. If someone's speaking into the camera, the focus is normally on their face. It's where the person viewing the picture or viewing the film and looking at the picture, that's where you want their attention to go. And so if they want them to look at an object, it's that object that's in focus. And focus isn't always something that we do with cameras. We have focus on ourselves, or we focus on objects. Jessica knows that I have a hard time paying attention to things. I'm one of those people that if I see something out of the corner of my eye, I instantly just look at it. Or there was a movie that came out, a kid's movie, and there was a dog in it, and he'd see a squirrel, and he just would always go, "Squirrel?" All right, I think it's Up, is that movie. Anyways, that's me. I see something, and my attention is focused on that. And so Jessica knows that if she wants me to pay attention, or if she wants me to remember what she's telling me, she knows to basically grab my head, look at me in the eyes, and don't let anything distract me. And so, but we have focus ourselves. We want to make sure that we are paying attention, or we want the person who we're talking to pay attention to us. We don't want them, darting around or looking around. And so tonight, we are asking the question, where is our focus, or where are we looking? What has our attention? What things in our life have our focus? And so, where are we looking? But also maybe when are we looking? And that idea of when are we looking will also come into play at the end. So our opening text tonight is actually going to come from Genesis chapter 19. If you want to be turning there, that's going to be our main story for tonight. And this is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And our lesson for tonight is not going to be about Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're not even going to really talk about God's righteousness or judgment like this story is use sometimes. Instead, I want us to look at two moments in this story that's going to be kind of a springboard for what we're actually going to be talking about tonight. So Genesis 19. So assuming most of us probably know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, that there are people living in great sin, and God's going to punish them for their sin. But Lot, Abraham's nephew, and Lot's family live in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so two angels are sent to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they meet Lot, and Lot ends up bringing them to his house. And then some of the town men come to Lot's house, demanding that he let the men out of his house, and the angels strike the men with blindness. And then we come to why the angels are actually there, why they are really in Sodom and Gomorrah, and the warning that they extend to Lot and his family. So let's begin in Genesis chapter 9, verse 12. We're going to read through 26. The two men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." When Lot hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his two daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here's a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request to you. I will not overthrow the town you speak of. But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zor. By the time Lot reached Zor, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So two items from this story that we're going to talk about. One, you can probably already guess, because at the very end I put a little emphasis on it there at the end. But going back to verse 15, when they warn Lot to get his family out of town, it's kind of this get out of Dodge kind of language. Punishment and destruction is coming, so you need to get out. And then verse 16 tells us that Lot hesitated. Why did he hesitate? We don't know. We're not told why he hesitated. Maybe he was old and he didn't think he could make it in time. Verse 18 through 20 that we just read kind of points to maybe this might be why, that he was old, didn't think he could get out in time or whatever. We don't really know. Maybe that was why. Maybe the hesitation was more of a fear or a shock. When you hear bad news, sometimes you get frozen and you can't move. So maybe that was the hesitation. Maybe he didn't want to leave. We don't know why he hesitated, but we're told that he hesitated, and when the angels realized he was hesitating, they weren't going to just wait around for him to come to his senses. They weren't going to wait for him to kind of snap out of that shock, or maybe wait for him to analyze the situation. It says they grabbed his hands and they were going to force him to move his feet. They're telling us that this is an urgent situation and it requires you to move your feet. Sometimes we're faced with serious situations that require immediate action. But we might want to sit around and overanalyze things. And really, we end up making things more complicated than they really are. I was talking to my dad a while back just about some stuff, and he sent me this line in a text it was kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek. He said, make sure to study the problem from all angles before you do the obvious. And what my dad was saying is, if you imagine you've got a child in the middle of the street, and then you look down and you see a car barreling down the street for the child, you don't sit there and think, what should I do? What are my options? Maybe I yell to the child and say, hey, there's a car coming, get out of the street. Maybe I run down to the car and tell them, hey, slow down or stop. There's a child in the street. Or maybe I just sit there and wait for a minute and think, maybe let's wait and see if he turns. Maybe the car will turn. No, you don't analyze the situation. If there is a child in immediate danger, you jump into action right then and there. You go out into the street, you grab the child, and you get them out of the street. You go into action. You don't sit there and analyze the situation. And so here, the city is going to be destroyed. You don't sit there and try to analyze the situation. You do the obvious thing, which is getting out of Dodge. And so Lot hesitated. But that's not the only time someone either hesitates or someone seems to think twice about the whole situation. If you jump down to verse 26, it says, Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Why she looked back, we don't know. Again, we don't know. Maybe she was curious to see what was happening back at the city. Kind of that whole rubbernecking. When there's a wreck on the side of the road, you slow down because you want to look at the wreck. Maybe that's what was going on. Maybe her looking back was symbolic, perhaps, of her missing her home, being sad that she had to leave what was comfortable to her. Or maybe she decided that she didn't want to leave her home. And so her looking back was actually her stopping and deciding to go back, turning around and going back. We don't know why she looked back. There's a whole lot of speculation that we could read into all of this, but what we do know is that they were commanded in verse 17 not to look back, and she did. And so she chose to look back to her home. In fact, the only other time Lot's wife is mentioned is in Luke chapter 17. Here in chapter 17, Jesus, he's speaking about the coming of the Son of Man, the final days. He's speaking about judgment. And he talks about it in that it will come when people aren't expecting it. Luke 17, verse 31 says, on that day, no one who is on the housetop with possessions inside should go down to get them. Likewise, no one in the field should go back for anything. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever tries to keep their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life will preserve it. What Jesus is saying here is that we can't look back. You won't have a second chance to go back and try to change anything. You won't have a second chance to improve on anything. There's no second chance. He's talking about this idea of judgment. There's no second chance. We must be ready. And so we must look ahead. Jesus speaks to his disciples and the crowd with the same theme in Luke chapter 9. In fact, let's go to Luke chapter 9 because we'll look at a few verses from there. Jesus is speaking to this crowd and he kind of talks to them with this idea of, if you want to follow me, then you can't look back. There's no looking back. Luke 9:23. Then Jesus said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Jesus says that if we want to follow him, we are to deny ourselves and take up our cross. We crucify our old self. Crucifixion and death, it's a final thing. There's no going back. There's no looking back. There's no way to partially carry your cross. Where we can't carry it only part of the time or when it's convenient. It's all or nothing. And Jesus says the same thing to his followers in verse 57 of the same chapter. Jump down to verse 57. As they were walking along the road, a man said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." He said to another man, "Follow me." But he replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Still another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family." Jesus replied, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Verse 58, Jesus tells the crowd that following him is going to be tough. Verse 60, he says that if you're going to follow him, your priority is now to be about serving the kingdom of God. It's no longer about doing what you want or what the world tells you to do. And then in verse 62, he says that if you are going to follow me, you have to be 100% committed. There's no second guessing your commitment. There's no looking back. There's no thinking about it twice. He tells them that they cannot look back into the past. They cannot long for their old self. And so following Jesus, it's a final decision. There is no looking back. And so the question becomes, where are we looking? And the truth is, we have three options for where we might be looking. We can look behind us, we can look around us, or we can look ahead of us. We can look behind, around, or ahead of us. And there's two situations where we might be looking. The first one is in our walk with God. And so in our walk with God, we can look behind us. We can look at our past life. We can look at the sin. I've heard some people, they talk about their past life, and they say, "Oh, before I knew Jesus, my life was full of all of this stuff. But then I became a Christian, and I gave all that up." And it's almost like they gave up that stuff, and now it's kind of, they talk about it almost like they live a boring life now. That before I had all this partying and fun, but now I follow Jesus and I do nothing. And really, that's not, you give up that stuff for a better life that is a different kind of partying, let's say. But it's, you don't look to that past, you don't look at that, maybe it's looking back to that stuff and thinking, "Oh, I've done all that stuff in my life. I've got all this junk in my life." But when we become a Christian, God forgives all of that. We are forgiven. We are washed clean through the blood of Christ. So we don't look to our past anymore. But maybe we look around us at the broken world we're in. Maybe we look and we think, this world that we live in, it's so broken, it's so messed up, there's so much junk out there, and we almost kind of just lose hope in everything. Think, what's the use? I see the stuff on the news, I see all the stuff on TV, I see all the filth and junk that's out there in the world. I see what people are having to deal with on Facebook. I see everything that people are. What's the use? And so we look and we just see around us and we see this broken world, and it saddens us, it might depress us, and we almost just lose hope in everything. But I want to offer an alternative of where we should be looking. Instead of looking to our past, and even instead of looking around us at the brokenness, instead, let's look ahead to the future. Look ahead to heaven. Live as people of the kingdom of God. Live where our focus is on the kingdom. And I think what we will realize is when we live with our future in mind, with heaven in mind, that will then influence how we live in this broken world. That will impact how we face the broken world. And then if we live with our mind on the future, on heaven, that will then impact how we view our past. And so it's all about focusing ahead of us, focusing on the future, focusing on heaven, living for God, looking to the future, putting our focus as kingdom people. So that's one situation, our walk with God, on when we should be looking to the future. And I want us to look at one other situation. And that's in our church. Is looking within our church. Where do we look within our church? And some people might disagree with me on some of these things. That's okay. This is my opinion right here. But I want us to really think about this idea of looking where we should be looking within our church. And sometimes we might think we look to the past and we think, when the church was in this, that was great. Or, we think, oh, man, if we did it this way, or remember the glory days, we might say. And we look there, and I'm not saying the things that were there in the past, but culture and especially technology changes. And I think what Mike is doing with Bible Talk is a great example of this. And he talks a lot about how he's using technology and the internet for kingdom work, for the work of the church, where he's taking the truth and sending it through the internet. But then we can even start looking right now, and things change so quickly these days that if you are caught up right now, you're 5 months behind, basically. Things change so rapidly, and so it's almost this idea of looking to the future with our church. Where do we want to see our church going? Where do we want to see the church in Choctaw going in the future? Where do we want it to be in a year? Where do we want it to be 5 years from now or 10 years? What is our purpose or our intention even with everything we do? If the things we are doing aren't fulfilling a need or a purpose, then maybe it's time to adapt. It's about looking ahead, looking to the future. I read a lot of books about church growth and just kind of discipleship, and a lot of the books encourage churches not to be stagnant. We talk a lot about being stagnant in our faith, where we're just sitting there, we're not moving, we're not growing. Especially right now, stagnant is a great image because we've got mosquitoes outside. And they talk a lot about getting rid of any stagnant water because it draws mosquitoes. And so we shouldn't be stagnant in our faith, but I want to encourage us as well that we not be stagnant as a church. We can get in the habit of just doing the same thing or just coasting along, and we don't quite look to the future. In one of the books, it talks about clock making and time-telling churches. And clocks and how they are made has changed over the years. My parents still have a grandfather clock that chimes every 15 minutes. And then every so often you have to raise, I don't even know what those things are called, but you have to raise those weights in them, and if it's gotten off, you have to adjust the time. But then we have alarm clocks. We have digital alarm clocks. We have watches, digital watches with a battery that you don't have to wind. In fact, we even have watch clocks now that are on our phones, and we may not even carry a watch anymore. And so clocks and how they are made changes. But the purpose and goal of those clocks of telling time has never changed. And so a clock-making church makes a clock a certain way and keeps doing it because it's always been made that way. But a time-telling church looks at the truth, looks at that purpose or what the truth is, and realizes that the truth does not change. The truth does not change, but how that truth is delivered might change from generation to generation. And so it's not about looking ahead or even looking around. Looking behind. It's looking ahead. Where are we looking? And do we like where we are looking? Do I like where I am looking in my walk with God? Do we as a congregation like where we are going? Where we like we are... Oh, I can't speak right now. Do we like where we are looking? And so the invitation, not necessarily something for us to respond to right now, but maybe instead we think about what area needs growth or improvement. Where do I see a need in this congregation? Where do I see some growth? And instead of maybe just thinking, oh, someone should fill that need or someone should fill that growth, maybe it's time for me to step in and say, I'm going to meet that need. I'm going to fill that growth. I see a need for improvement, and so I'm going to step in. I'm going to step in right there. And so during the singing of this song, I want to encourage us, think, where am I going? Where are we going? What can I do to make sure that we are a telling time congregation? That we are looking ahead, that we have the kingdom of God in mind, that we are living as kingdom people. Where do I need to grow? But as always, we offer a regular invitation as well. If there's anything we can do for you tonight, if we can encourage you, if we can pray for you in any way, if there's anything we can do, please come now as we stand and sing.